What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Band of Crusaders, a sort of tactical RPG that you have probably seen the likes of with stuff like War Tales, Iron Oath, Battle Brothers, that kind of thing, just to name a few. But before we dive fully in to give you, I would say, the most important information, I'm bringing you this video via a demo that was released yesterday from the time of this video, but December 3rd. But it's not just the demo, actually. This demo was released as part of their upcoming Kickstarter campaign, which is apparently going to kick off soon. Obviously to show people what they had in mind. So you can in fact go play this demo for yourself right now. As always, I do not endorse Kickstarters. That's a decision you gotta make for yourself. If I'm being very honest, I don't really have any plans of backing this one for myself, but obviously I still want to provide information for people. And speaking of information, my main takeaway after playing this demo for a little while is basically two things. One, I think the art style has a tendency to look really muddy a lot of the time. It has this sort of like painter effect on a lot of different things, and I think that could stand to be cleaned up overall. Maybe even add a little more color here and there to make the visuals a little more distinct, but given the nature of this being an early demo, I'm not terribly worried about that specifically. The other thing was more that, as you heard me at the beginning of the video, there are a lot of games that do a very similar thing to what this game is trying to do, and in order for it to be successful, I imagine it would have to set itself apart in a substantial way from those other offerings. And we'll get into like the story and the combat and stuff here in just a moment, as there are a couple things that I think it could help do that, but probably one of the more prominent ones is that there is a pretty straightforward main story, it would seem. Most of the time with these more sandbox TRPG type of games, it is typically a little more open-ended than that. The game is often just done when you're done, having told the story of the mercenaries and everything you brought together in those individual games, whereas this game does seem like it's aiming for a slightly more cohesive narrative than that. But what is that narrative? Well, we start the game by having to flee our father and the rest of our knightly order that we belong to, as they are all about to die, and your job is to take some sacred artifact to a monastery nearby in the wake of what is the destruction of your knightly order, and thus you and the Crusaders that are left here do just that, and along the way, after resupplying and kind of getting back on your feet, you all come to the conclusion that it's time to found another order, starting right here, right now, as the artifact you were entrusted to carry is actually none other than the Holy Lance itself, or at least a piece of it, and your job is to assemble that weapon in hopes to stave off this demonic invasion that is tearing at the roots of the world before the place is overrun and falls to chaos. In order to do that, like pretty much all of these types of games, we have to manage our Holy Order, it would seem, meaning things like recruiting and handling individual units or crusaders, managing and upgrading our own camp, and dealing with the more dynamic world elements. So first up, our characters. So we'll get a whole host of different ones. You'll start the game with a few, and then you will be able to recruit them in individual towns and stuff as well. They will have stats and traits and things that you'll want to look for to try to recruit the best of the best. I did notice that some of these traits had trade-offs, like one thing would be more positive and another would come with a negative, that kind of thing. So it looks like the kind of thing where you want to find recruits that are going to be specialized in a thing that you want them to do, basically, because as you engage in combat, they level up, of course, and that's where you get this big classless ability tree where you will be able to put points into individual disciplines as you please. You can mix and match, do whatever you want, but basically the further in you get, the more specialized with those types of weapons they become, which forms their active and passive abilities. I'm not going to bother going over the specifics of this right now because it's obviously very early and subject to change. But either way, you're going to have to feed, heal, and outfit these people, which comes down to managing resources like, again, medicine, tools, that kind of stuff. And much of that is done through your camp interface. There is an actual camp that you'll have and be able to upgrade, which is where you're going to do things like set gear to be repaired, have health and stuff restored, making sure your guys are up and ready for the next battles that come your way. And later on, it looks like this will also expand to other stuff. I'm a little hazy on the details right now just because they weren't necessarily included in the demo here, but either way though, as you play, your camp should kind of evolve with you. But of course, a really big element of this is actually going to be combat. Now, combat is interesting in the sense that it drops you onto these maps that are a little bit explorable. They actually show one off at the very beginning of this demo that is effectively like a little mission that you move through. And I have to imagine that's probably stuff like the main story that you're going to see do a lot of that in particular, because all of the other battles I ran into were basically just like little random encounter type stuff where you're thrown onto what is clearly a more throwaway map and expected to engage in some fights. Now, combat here is in fact real-time with pause, which I know isn't everybody's cup of tea, but doesn't make much of a difference to me personally. And each of your characters has armor based on its current condition, their weapons of course, and the actual gear they've got, which contributes to that armor total. The types of weapons they are using are important. Unsurprisingly, things like maces, that kind of stuff, are better at punching through the armor bars of your enemies, whereas piercing and slashing weapons do better against actual health bars, and you'll have to sort of balance that and, of course, ranged options and stuff as you go. Characters can be injured, have to be healed up, stuff like that. But at least here in the early portions, it mainly looks like it comes down to some basic tactics of trying to use the appropriate weapons against the appropriate enemies, while also juggling things like their abilities, such as two-handed cleaves, shield bashes, charges, throwables. Like for instance, one of my guys got something that could set people on fire, things like that. And managing all of those abilities comes at the cost of stamina, which does seem to be like a per fight thing that has to regen outside of the individual mission you're on. Now, the bigger story mission also had things you could go around and loot, but all of the loot is collected at the end of these encounters, which you'll then take back to various cities to handle all of your sort of in-town activities, that be selling all of your ill-gotten gains, and then using the proceeds to recruit more Crusaders, patch up your supplies, or even take on new missions and the like outside of the main story objectives. So all in all, I'd say that's more or less what you're looking at with this particular game. There's a couple other things here and there, but again, all of this is a bit subject to change given the relatively early nature of it, so I don't want to get too deep into specifics of every little thing. But broad strokes, I'll say this. It seems to be a pretty good demo. You can tell that a good chunk of this is pretty well in place. There's a clear vision for it, and it does have a very specific feel and flavor of the thing that it is trying to be, which are these, again, sort of sandbox tactical titles. I think what makes or breaks it is, again, going to come down to how unique this feels and if that is good enough in the face of the other offerings from those other games in order to warrant playing on its own. Also, I'd be curious to see where the main story for this one goes, but otherwise, I like the art, I like the enemy design, and while this doesn't really seem like anything that is going to be releasing anytime soon, I'm definitely going to keep my eye on it, but in the meantime, we'll simply have to see where it lands, I suppose. But that's going to do it for today. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.